I'm Stephanie, and let's talk books. So today I have my Owl's Magical Readathon wrap up, and I did really well this Owls. So let's go ahead and start with our very first class, Ancient Runes. So the prompt for Ancient Runes was to read a book with either a heart on the cover or the word heart in the title. So I decided to read Heart of Flames by Nicki Preto. This is the sequel to The Crown of Feathers, which I really enjoyed. And it is a story about Phoenix Riders and then a girl who has to disguise herself as a boy to join the Phoenix Riders. And while I very much enjoyed the first one, the second one was just kind of okay for me. It felt very middle booky. But there will be more books in this series, so hopefully it will finish off with a bang. For Arithmancy, I had to read a book that was outside of my comfort zone, and since I am trying to read more science fiction this year, I decided to pick a science fiction book for this category, and I chose Red Rising by Pierce Brown. This is a sci-fi dystopian book about a civilization on Mars where the class sector is stratified by color, and depending on what color you are, it determines what your job is going to be. Our main character Darrow is a red, and he and his fellow reds live below the surface of Mars mining helium-3, and they believe that they are the first colonists on Mars, and they're working these really hard, dangerous jobs in order to terraform Mars so that people can eventually get there. What they don't know is that the terraforming of Mars has been completed, and there's a whole bunch of people living the good life up on the surface of Mars while the poor Reds are stuck being lied to and working these terrible jobs. So I really enjoyed this book. It gave me a lot of Hunger Games vibes, where you have this structured dystopian society and people are fighting against that, and then you have horrible things where your main protagonists have to do bad stuff. And I really enjoyed it, and I am definitely looking forward to finishing out this series. For astronomy, I had to pick a book and read it after dark, or at least mostly after dark, and I decided to pick Hero of Ages because I wanted to finish out my Mistborn reread. I had an amazing time reading this book. I love Mistborn, it's so good. You can see I took a lot of notes and tabbed all of the things because there's just so much good stuff in this book. It was really interesting rereading this being Cosmere aware and realizing how many Cosmere things that Brandon just kind of like drops randomly into the story, where if you're not aware of the Cosmere, it's not something that you're going to be lost about or would probably even notice. But if you are aware of the Cosmere, you're like, oh, nuggets of things. And so this was super, super good, and I'm really glad I read this. And I did manage to read this mostly after dark. The next class is Care of Magical Creatures, and you had to read a book with a creature with a beak on the cover because we're studying hippogriffs this year, and I decided to read Enchantment of Ravens. This is another reread for me, and I wanted to give myself something a little bit lighter after some of those other chunkier books. And we do in fact have our little bird beak on the cover. This is a very sweet fairy tale. It does have that fantasy fairy tale vibe, and it's very atmospheric and reminds me of a fairy tale retelling, except it's not based on any existing story, and it does also involve fae. So if you're looking for a fae story that maybe doesn't have quite as much of the twisted, cruel, dark side of the fae as a lot of the other young adult fae novels that have come out recently have, then you'll probably really like this one, because this one is much, much sweeter, although there are some pretty crafty characters in here still. For charms, we had to read a book with a white cover, and I have tons of white cover books, but I decided to go with An Ember in the Ashes. This is one that I listened to on audiobook, and I just happened to come up on the hold list during this readathon, so I thought this would be a great prompt to throw this one in here. I wanted to reread this series this year because the fourth book is supposed to be coming out at the end of the year, and I'm super excited for that because there was major cliffhangers at the end of the third book. But this is a really fun story. It's very action-packed. I really like that it is inspired by the world of ancient Rome, and that's not a setting you see a lot in fantasy. There's also a lot of Middle Eastern fantasy elements with jinns and ifrits and these other sort of creatures from Middle Eastern mythology. So that adds another little extra bit of flavor. And also I want to say that the audiobook for this is so good. I especially love the person who narrates the point of view of Elias. I just love his voice and I could listen to him all day, which is what you want from an audiobook narrator. For Defense Against the Dark Arts, I had to read a book that was either set at sea or on the coast. And this is one that I had to think about for a while because I'm not usually into pirate, mermaidy, naval type stuff, and I was trying to think of books that I knew had some important setting either on or near the sea. And then I remembered that Warbreaker actually takes place, most of it, in a coastal capital. And there are actually some important parts of the books that have to do with being on the sea or by the sea, even though this is not really the first book I think of when I think about nautical books. So I read Warbreaker. This is another one that I listened to the audiobook for. It was another reread. I had so much fun with this book. I love the magic system with Warbreaker. It is based on color, and also the idea that every person in this world is born with one unit of magical energy called a biochromatic breath, and the only way to get more magical energy is for someone else to give you their breath. So there's kind of a big limit on the magic, and gaining more breaths gives you different abilities. And then you can also use breaths to awaken objects. So you could make a piece of string and put some breath in it and tell it to grab things, and then you throw it at a pole and it will latch onto the pole, and then you could climb up the rope, for example. It's also got two really great female protagonists, Ciri and Mavenna, who are sisters and princesses. So for divination, we had to use a random number generator to pick a book off of our larger TBR. So what I did is I went through the unread books that I have, and I picked up a couple of first books in a series, a first series that I was excited to start this year, and then used a random number generator to pick from those. That was great because it got me something that I was interested in reading and started a series, and then also made sure that I didn't pick like book 3 of a series when I hadn't read book 1 or 2. And the book that I got was Ender's Game, and this is a classic science fiction story about a genius child named Ender who gets sent to this insane military academy for genius children because the Earth has been at war with these aliens that they call buggers for a very long time, and so they have established this military academy to train up officers from a very young age, and it's about his time in this crazy military school. So this was one that was just okay for me. I'm not super big into military stuff, and a lot of this book was battle oriented, like battle simulations and such. For me, that wasn't particularly interesting. And also, I had a really hard time connecting with the main character, Ender. I did not find the age that we are told he is to be very believable. He is 6 at the beginning of the book, and he did not act like a 6-year-old, even like a really precociously smart 6-year-old. Like, it just, I couldn't buy that he was at this stage of character development at that age, so that was really hard for me. And another thing that I had difficulty with was, while things were definitely hard for Ender, they were hard because people kept putting obstacles in his path and not because he failed. So I didn't feel like he really ever learned anything. It was always just like, here's this new hard challenge, and Ender struggled really hard, but then he made it. So it kind of killed the suspense. And I also knew how it ended because I'd already seen the movie adaptation. So I think if I was more into military stuff and I didn't know the twist, I would have enjoyed this book a lot more. And I am glad that I read it. I can see why it is considered a classic in the science fiction genre, and I do think I want to continue on with the series. The main set of books is a quartet, and I know there are also some spin-off series. So I will hopefully be coming back to Ender's Game. So for Herbology, I had to read a book that started with the letter M for Mimulus Mimbletoneum, which, Harry Potter fact, that is a plant that Neville Longbottom brings with him to school. Thought that was super cool. And then for History of Magic, we had to read a book that had witches or wizards in it. And so for these two prompts, I picked books from the Belgariad. Now this is a bind-up of the first 3 books in the series. So I had previously read the first book, Pawn of Prophecy, earlier this year, and so I used the second book, Queen of Sorcery, for the History of Magic prompt because there are quite a few magic users in here. They prefer the term sorcerer or sorceress as opposed to witch or wizard, but the core of the definition of both words is people that use magic. So we counted that. And then I used book 3, Magician's Gambit, as my Mimulus Mimbletoneum prompt. The Belgariad is a classic fantasy series, and it follows a chosen one prophecy trope. But one of the things I love about this is the world. The world is big and interesting and diverse, and we have a wide cast of characters from all these different cultures, and getting to see them and seeing them interact with each other and try to get along when their cultures are so different. And then we're moving towards this prophecy who some of the members of the group know like all the details about what's going on, but many of the members as well as the reader don't know everything, so we're kind of discovering sort of what's going on and what's at stake as we go along. So I really, really love this series. This is one I read a lot growing up, and I'm super happy I decided to do a reread of this series this year. And this is definitely something that I would recommend. The books themselves are not that long. They come in at about 300 pages in the mass market paperback edition, and then there's 5 books in the series. For Muggle studies, I had to read a book that was written from the perspective of a Muggle, which meant something that was contemporary. Now, I don't usually read contemporary, so I decided to take a book recommendation from a fellow booktuber, Elliot, from Elliot Brooks, and she read Geekerella in February because it was a cute romance and she really enjoyed it, so I thought I would pick it up and give it a try. And so Geekerella is a Cinderella retelling that involves a girl who is really into this science fiction TV show, and they're getting ready to make a reboot of it. And because of all the hype and the reboot, there is this big con, and she wants to go to this con and win this cosplay contest, but she also runs a blog, and she is not happy that for the main character in the reboot, they cast this fluffy, tweeny bopper heartthrob guy that she doesn't think knows or cares anything about the show. But he is secretly also a super nerd about the show, and as one could predict, they run into each other and sparks fly. So I really enjoyed this. This was a very light and fun read. It wasn't anything like super amazing that I'm going to just gush over it, but it was really fun. I do enjoy Cinderella retellings, even all of the really cheesy movie ones. And so this was a nice fun read, and it did have some cool aspects and little nuggets for all of us nerds. For potions, I had to read a book under 150 pages because we're studying the shrinking solution. And if you know anything about me, you know that I like big books. Chunkers. Super chunky chunker, 1,000+ page monstrosities. So I had a real hard time finding a book under 150 pages. Even my graphic novels all clocked in over 150 pages. So yeah, short books. Who knew? I ended up reading Letter to a Christian Nation, which is a nonfiction book by Sam Harris. This is one that my husband had checked out of the library because he wanted to read it. And it just happens to be under 150 pages, so I also decided to read it. This book is what it says. It's a letter, and it discusses certain difficulties with the concept that America is a Christian nation and should therefore be run with Christian principles. Sam Harris is an atheist, and so he doesn't want Christians, or really any other religious group, to legislate their morality on the rest of the country who may have different opinions on what's moral and what's not moral. So yeah, it is basically a book in defense of the separation of church and state, and some of the reasons why particularly the extreme fundamentalist Christian conservative right-wing politics that is very prevalent today are particularly harmful to those of us who are not ultra-conservative fundamentalist Christians. So don't want to get super political on here, but if that sounds like an interesting topic to you, then I would highly recommend this book. The last class for the owls is Transfiguration, and we had to read a book that included shapeshifters, and so I decided to read Supernova. I have been rereading this series this year, and one of the characters is able to transform into a swarm of butterflies. So that's pretty cool. So Supernova is a YA science fiction novel where certain individuals have begun to manifest superhero powers on Earth, which of course sets everything into chaos. And one of the characters, Nova, is the niece of an anarchist, and she decides to infiltrate the Renegades superhero training program to gather information about them. And this is a really good series. It plays a lot with the idea of how there's people aren't 100% good or 100% bad. We're all kind of in that gray area, and a lot of the characters in the book struggle with trying to determine which side is right and who's doing the right things and who is maybe doing things that are wrong. And it is a great story, and even up till close to the very end, I really wasn't sure which side I should be rooting for, which is always a plus for me when an author can keep me excited and interested and engaged and I can't predict the ending. So that is the end of the core owls prompts. As you can see, I got 100% on my owls this year. I decided not to pick a career to go after because I'm not sure what my life is going to look like during the newts, and right now I did have a lot of extra time for reading, so I decided just to go the whole 9 yards and try to read all of the prompts. And I did, so that means when the Newts Readathon comes along later on this year, I can pick whatever career that I want to because I will have fulfilled all the owls prerequisites. And I can pick something either a little bit easier or a little bit harder depending on how busy I am. So I did also finish a couple of additional books this month. The first one I finished is Age of Empyre, and this is one I used for one of the bonus seminar prompts, which is Dragon Tamer, and you had to read a book that features dragons. Age of Empyre is the last book in the Legends of the First Empire series by Michael J. Sullivan. It is one of my favorite series. It's super great. I was very excited that I was able to get an early copy of the ebook for supporting the Kickstarter, and I am excited that my hard copy book should be here in May and it will be officially published. That's very exciting. It being the 6th book, they can't really say a lot, but besides the fact that there's dragons in it and it's super awesome. It's also got a lot of really cool female characters, which I really appreciate, as it's not always the case with fantasy. And they're also quite varied. So we have a strong female protagonist who is a political leader. We have one who is a really great archer. We have one who's super smart and invents things. We have one who is the keeper of like all the tales of her people, and she is recording history, and we actually get little epigraphs at the beginning of each of the chapters that are from this history book that she compiled talking about this grand adventure that everyone is going on. So I really appreciate that there's a lot of those cool female characters and not just either one-dimensional background love interest type characters or the sassy swordswoman. because those are really the two main kind of lady characters we get. Another book that I finished this month is A Memory of Light, which is the last book in the Wheel of Time series. If you guys haven't been following along for a while, I've been reading this series since January of 2019, which is a grand total of 16 months. So I've been at this a long haul. This is a giant 14-book series plus a prequel, and I'm finally done, and I'm super excited. Again, with this being the last book in the series, not a whole lot to talk about that's not spoilery. But if you are interested in hearing my thoughts about Wheel of Time, I have been doing Wheel of Time reading updates throughout the whole series, so I'll go ahead and leave that linked in the cards and in the description below. I will be putting out a video dedicated just to this last book, and then as well as another wrap-up video with my thoughts about the whole series. But I decided I wanted to take a little bit of time to kind of gather my thoughts and think about it, because I do feel a little bit conflicted about this series being done and how the ending wrapped up and all the characters and all of that stuff. So more thoughts will be coming on the Wheel of Time. So those are some of the books that I read this month. I'm recording this section a little bit ahead of time because my library has finally started accepting book returns. They extended the due date for all of their books till June 1st while they shut down the library system until they could kind of figure out a way to work the library system in a way that was safe for the current conditions of our world. And they finally have a system set up where you can put in a hold, and then you'll go to the library parking lot, call the library, they will check your books out for you, leave them on a table outside, and then you can go and pick them up and not have any interaction with the librarians. And then they are sanitizing all of the books that are being returned. So I did want to return some of the books that I have because I have a lot. And I actually have a couple that have come in through the hold system for holds that I put in before the library system shut down. So those will be going onto my May TBR. So I'll be inserting a little end clip here with just whatever I managed to finish for the end of the month, which, since I still have like a whole week of April left, might actually be a couple of things. So I have, I think, 2 audiobooks that I'm going to finish, and hopefully 2 physical books. So yeah, I've been reading a lot this month. I don't know about y'all, but I've been reading a lot. So I'll go ahead and roll that footage. Great. So here are the rest of the books that I finished in the month of April. I finished 2 audiobooks. The first is The Sword of Destiny, which is the second book of short stories in the Witcher series. Unfortunately, this series is still just okay for me. There are some things that I like, some things that I don't like. I don't like the fact that the timeline is still all weird and nebulous. I'm really hoping that once I move on to the full-length novels, that problem will go away. I think this series has really brought to light for me that I don't particularly care if the prose is super excellent if the rest of the story elements aren't there for me. In this one in particular, there was just some weird choices about the level of sexual content in the book. Yeah, it was kind of odd. There were lots of these lush descriptions of like breasts and nipples and like the beginnings of people getting together, and then it kind of faded to black, which I thought is a really odd choice. Usually they either fade to black way before that, or they just show you everything, and I don't know, it just felt kind of odd to me and wasn't my favorite. Hopefully there's less nipple descriptions in the next series. And the second audiobook that I finished is Torch Against the Night, which is the second book in the Ember and the Ashes series. This one that I had actually put on my May TBR when I filmed my May TBR, and then I ran out of audiobooks. And this one's kind of short, so I went ahead and finished it because I didn't really want to open another series. I have quite a few series I'm kind of currently reading through right now. So this one was good. It was a great reread, and I will be excited to get to the third one in May. And then the next book that I finished is Golden Sun. This is the second book in the Red Rising series, and I very much enjoyed this. I enjoyed it so much, in fact, that I went ahead and busted right through Morningstar, which was also really good. This is a very action-packed, exciting fighting type series where you got like hand-to-hand combat. You also have like space combat. You have a cool science fiction dystopian world, and I really enjoyed this series. Overall, 4 stars for me. A couple of things that kept it from being a 5-star. First off is it's definitely kind of a man type story. So there were certain elements that just, I feel like would just appeal more to men and is more their style. That aren't particularly my style. Some of the relationship between the guy characters is kind of some eye roll moments, like, ugh, that's such a boy thing to do, like, whatever. But it was cool because it was in line with the personalities of the characters, and I do think that it is good to have stories that have these elements for the readers who really enjoy them. My husband is currently reading Golden Sun, and he's absolutely loving this series, so that's great. The other thing that I was a little bit disappointed in with Morningstar in particular was the epilogue. I just wish authors wouldn't write epilogues, because so often, like, you get to the end, you have a really satisfying conclusion, and they just want to add that little bit more, and then it kind of ruins the ending for me. And I'm a big endings person, and ending can make or break a book for me. So I had the same problem with the Harry Potter series. I absolutely hate that epilogue, and I wish it wasn't in there, and I appreciate the fact that J.K. Rowling has said that she kind of regrets some of the stuff that she put in the epilogue. It was too, like, perfect, happy, we're all married now and adults and have babies, and our babies are all friends. It was just a little much gushy for how dark that series got. And we had kind of a similar situation here in Morningstar. They're all different, the different things that I didn't like about the endings, but it's all like the very end. Like, if they just stopped, just stop. So, anywho's, I'll be very excited to move on with the series, and maybe when I start the second part of the series, I will enjoy kind of the epilogue more, and it'll make more sense, and as a full narrative, it will be more satisfying. But kind of as the end of the trilogy, where it was initially planned to stop, I was a little disappointed with that. But the rest of the book was still really solid, and it wasn't enough to really make me dock it down to a 3-star. So that is it for all of the books that I read in the month of April. I read a grand total of 18, which is a lot. I have read 18 books before, and I was during the 2019 Newt's Readathon, but that included quite a few graphic novels as well as novellas and short stories. So for this month, everything was a full-length novel, with the exception of the Letter to a Christian Nation. That was kind of a little short, more of a novella length, but I didn't have any graphic novels. I read a lot, over 7,000 pages. That is with me taking out the 500 pages of A Memory of Light that I did read in March. So yeah, that's a lot, and I think it'll be a while before I really hit that number again. I am planning on still reading a lot of books in May, but maybe just dialing it back 1 or 2 notches, because I did kind of start to feel a smidge burnt out by the end of the month, with basically spending all of my free time reading, as well as a lot of my work hours listening to audiobooks. So I will see what happens in May. So let me know down in the comment section below what your favorite April read was.